Okay, now you've actually seen that, and to talk or to discuss further on this particular issue, we have Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust, Sunday Michael, here in the studio with us. Good morning, sir.
Good
Thanks
morning.
for
It's
joining
a
us.
pleasure to be here
All right,
again.
so let's have your opinion on the President writing a letter to Senate on the bill.
I think yesterday was a sort of disappointment for people who have been keeping a vigil on the political space or scene for some time. It was something Nigerians wanted. It was something a number of political players wanted. It was something the leaders of the National Assembly, after several visits to the president, assured Nigerians that he was going to assent to the bill. But we know a certain group of powerful people, including the caucuses of the governors, didn't want this. And so basically, in summary, it was a triumph of the governors over the will of Nigerians, because what we had wanted was a platform that would allow for more political participation. If you want to increase active citizenry, then right from the primaries, people should be involved in how those who would fly the party ticket are selected. It shouldn't be the exclusive preserve of the few. So what we have seen is the tyranny of the minority, of people who want to continue to hold this nation at the jugular. The president was also a beneficiary of electoral reforms. He should remember that. If the previous governments were not willing to open up the systems more, he probably wouldn't be president. We thought that given that he would not be standing in the next election, having served out his 2 terms graciously, that if there was any fitting gift, it should have been about this electoral amendment. And let us not also forget that there are quite a number of other things in the electoral bill, and not just about the direct primaries or not. There were supposed to be innovations or even an improvement on our electoral systems. And basically what we have done is to throw away the baby and the bathwater. What we had thought at best is if he had reservations, as we saw with the PIB bill, he would have assented and immediately communicate the National Assembly on areas where you think 1 or 2 amendments should be made. But for the president to then come out to say one chief among other reasons were security reasons to conduct it, oh, come on. Even the elections we hold in this country regardless. Elections are holding in Afghanistan regardless. If we cannot secure a primary, which is supposed to be something that happens in a confined space, how do we justify even securing the staggered elections in states that we have seen? So that excuse seems lame. There is also the issue of being too expensive. Expensive for who? INEC is not going to be the one to cover the expense for these elections anyway. It is the political party itself. If you want to make something robust and as participatory as possible, then it will involve money. At any rate, there are innovations now that can take that away. Who said party primaries cannot be digitally done? Who said you have to print anything? So it was a disappointing day. What then happens is that this has shifted completely away from the president's table to the National Assembly. And what we don't know, and the signs are not also very obvious, is whether this National Assembly can brace up to this challenge and probably stand on the side of the people, rather than go with the lame excuse that the president has provided.
Okay, we're still going to look at, other, perspectives to the whole conversation around the Electoral Act amendment and Electoral Bill amendment. Now let's take a look at some of the stories making headlines on our dailies this morning, starting with the Daily Trust newspaper. The lead story there: 45 farmers killed, 5,000 displaced in Nasarawa. The riders there: residents flee as bandits kill traditional ruler in Kaduna. Panic as fleeing bandits chase Abuja farmers, abduct 2. Another rider is saying ACF slams Buhari, northern governors. You see on the page 4, Omicron, Nigeria enters COVID-19 fourth wave. There's also a story there about no winner for 2021 Daily Trust African of the Year Award. You'd also see on the Daily Trust newspaper, INEC seeks 305 billion naira for 2023 polls as Senate passes budget today. And you'd also see why I rejected electoral bill. That's according to President Muhammad Buhari. And on page 25 of Daily Trust newspaper, I collected 6 million from kidnappers to improve my cattle business. Oh, that's absurd. You find the details of that story on page 23 of Daily Trust newspaper. Disquiet as truck owners fault MPA's e-collop system. And you'd find on page 22 of the Daily Trust newspaper, I stabbed my fiancé because I saw him with another girl. You'd find the details of that on page 22 of the Daily Trust newspaper. So these are some of the lead stories on the Daily Trust newspaper this morning.
All right, with that, we'll move on to the Punch newspaper. And right at the top, you see a story here that reads, PFA's recapitalization. 4 firms begin merger talks. GTCO acquires player. And you find detail of that story on page 21. Nigeria has recorded 500% infection increase in 2 weeks, and that is coming from NCDC. You can find details of that on page 19. 20 Nasarawa farmers, herdsmen killed. 8,175 Kaduna bandits, others arrested. And you have a few riders there. Herdsmen attack Tiv villages, kill 20 Tiv farmers, 5,000 displaced. ACF lambasts Buhari. Governors as Kaduna death toll rises to 40. And then we have this particular story on page 21 that says 9 hydropower projects to add 2,672 megawatts to national grid, says federal government. And we also have CSOs accuse National Assembly top officials of document falsification. Details of that story on page 16. And the lead here says Electoral Act amendment. Buhari returns bill to NAS. False direct primaries cites insecurity. And the writers here say primary mode against party constitutions too expensive. Small parties will be marginalized. Review direct primaries clause. Send document back for assent. President tells National Assembly. You can find details of that particular story on page 16. Passport applicants patronize touts to get faster services, says Arigbe Shola. All right, we also have more stories here. Officials siphon government funds under cover of paying ransoms, says Kwara Commissioner. We also have anxious patient's relative attacks Lassuth workers, nurse breaks neck. Others injured, and you can find details of that story on page 4 and 5. Lagos issues 137 billion naira bond for Lekki Road projects, healthcare, and others. Okay, and I think these are the stories we have on the front page of the Punch newspaper.
Okay, let's take one more paper this morning, talking about the Nation newspaper. The lead story there, why President declined assent to Electoral Act bill. Pressure on National Assembly to override Buhari Wike. Lawmakers lack will. You also see on the Nation newspaper this morning, Yuletide, rise in deaths from Omicron likely, NCDC warns. You'd also find on page 4 of the Nation newspaper, herders kill 13 farmers in Nasarawa. Police, 8 persons die. You'd also find on the Nation newspaper, get your NIN now. JAM tells UTME candidates. Insecurity, ACF tackles Buhari, notes governors. So these are some of the lead stories on the Nation newspaper. As we have earlier told you, we have Sunday Michael, Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust, here this morning to review the papers. Earlier, before we took some of these stories on the dailies this morning, we're talking about the whole conversation about the Electoral Act bill. And right here on the Nation newspaper, it states there's pressure. It states that there's pressure on the National Assembly to override Buhari, and many are saying they actually do not have, the guts to do that. Do you think this is something that is going to change, with time?
You would excuse those who have not expressed sufficient faith in the National Assembly if you begin to look at the antecedent of this particular National Assembly. They've basically assented to all the requests of the president, basically. All the borrowing plans, despite the hues and cries, scaled through the national. At other times, they even had to offer defenses for even the president's program. So people, on the basis of some of these trends, are justified to say, we don't see these people, having sufficient courage to say, Mr. President, on this one, you are wrong. This is a popular bill, and we would veto your refusal to assent to the bill. So that is where the fear lies. But if they do it, they will be proving myself and several other people wrong. And I hope, for once, that becomes the case, because it will be painful. If we're talking about being expensive, this was one exercise that was really very expensive. It almost put the two chambers of the National Assembly at a loggerhead. I remember in some of my visit to the studio here, we were discussing how we were even doubtful that the houses will come to an agreement on what is the best for us as this country. If that bill could scale the National Assembly, with all that it promises to offer, like I did mention, it's not just about the direct primaries. It's also about the transmission of votes electronically, which we also thought was very nice. So whilst you think you are saving costs on the one hand, retaining what we currently have is also expensive. So if you don't, it's not like you will not transmit hard copies, but if we are able to then do some of these things electronically, as we have seen in some of these staggered elections, it means we will begin to save cost on some of the ways that we have always done something. And INEC is an institution that will continue to evolve, because every time these politicians master a way we do things, they find a way to circumvent it. So the only way you have to remain regular as an umpire is to continue to evolve, reinvent your approaches, introduce novel approaches so that, people keep, the balance keeps shifting, it doesn't remain static, and reduces the possibility of people hijacking the electoral process.
Okay, now from what we can see on Punch newspaper, it seems like the president is trying to be fair on all sides, because we have the writer that says he doesn't want small parties to be marginalized, and also the fact that, he's telling the National Assembly to review the direct primary clause and, bring it back for assent.
He said he doesn't want small parties to be marginalized, and I struggle to understand the logic, because the small parties are not holding direct primaries against the big parties. It's an internal affair. So if you are big, your processes may be big, it may be expensive. If you are small, it then means your processes would also be small. If you are a party of 10,000 followers, what it will cost you to hold a direct primary is not the same thing with a party that has over 1 million followers, right? So I don't understand the whole concept of marginalization. If you have done with your primaries, your candidate basically goes to pitch himself against candidates from other parties in the general election, where anybody can be swayed to vote for anyone of their choice. So that logically doesn't sit properly with me. And then you talk about party constitution. If you are coming into a contest, your own rules are not as important as the rule of the contest. If you work for Daily Trust and you have a personal principle not to wake up until 10 a.m. in the morning, and Daily Trust is saying you've got to be in the studio by 6 a.m., you've got to adjust if you want to take that job. Right. So if the umpire has got a rule that will impact on what they recognize from you as a process, the onus falls on you to adjust your own process to conform with the rule. So I don't understand why the president would drop something that has a national interest because it conflicts with the rule of a player, that's looked to benefit from what the umpire does. So On many grounds, as long as as much as the president feels strongly about the position he has canvassed, we also think that there is so much illogic, from preliminary evaluation of the reasons the president has given. And it is for these reasons and several others that we feel that if the National Assembly really want to do one thing right in this dispensation, it would have to be with this electoral reform.
All right, let's have your take on INEC proposing 305 billion naira for the 2023 elections.
Huge, right? Bigger than some states' budgets, if you like. But it's the reality that we live in this country. From the days of Jaga in 2011, when he proposed 100 billion, it felt like the heavens were going to fall. And today we are doing
300
three folds of what we did 10 years ago. But why is the INEC budget is a one-line item? It really doesn't have any explanation at the National Assembly. But you can begin to understand quite a number of these things. They will be recruiting a large number of ad hoc staffs. What they paid an ad hoc staffs in 2011 or 2015 would not be the same today because of the impact of inflation. And today we know what the minimum wage is. And so you want to situate payment somewhere around that region. Two, some of the electronic gadgets they used in the last election obviously are obsolete, and you will be thinking of replacing them. The third one is now there is even more insecurity than there were in the past. So if you needed 5,000 policemen to do, let's say 100,000 policemen to do elections in 2011, you probably need like 500,000 today, So, and each of these guys you engage in ad hoc services, you have to make some honorarium or provisions for them, whether it is mobility or some kind of welfare and all of that. And today, the INEC is bringing a lot more of innovations and technology like the beavers, which will require the procurement of even more gadgets. It will require training of these ad hoc staffs, before the election. It will require deploying some kind of technologies, to make transmission seamless. So when you begin to put all of this, and coupled with the fact that there had been devaluation, so what it was, most of these services will be procured in dollars because, like, the voting sheets are not printed in this country, as I've always known, the sensitive security documents. And so if you have to do any business outside the shores of this country, it has to be denominated in dollars. And today we know what it takes to get a dollar as against what it was in 2011. So when you put all of those factors together, it begins to come together why we probably would have to spend 305. I am not holding forth for INEC, but I'm just trying to put my head around why this value may have moved from 100 billion in 2011 to 305 billion today. Okay.
Now let's take a look at a whole new dimension to the whole issue of the electoral bill. The Punch newspaper and the Nation newspaper are leading with that similar story, but Daily Trust is leading with a whole different story. Why did Daily Trust choose this to lead with?
Different strokes for different folks. With the benefit of a hindsight, since I also sit on that board, we thought that human life, it's sacrosanct. It's not something to be told you. Even if it was the death of one person in unavoidable circumstances, it should be highlighted. I think we are becoming familiar with death, that it just feels like a number. If you begin to cascade those 40, 45 deaths, and you begin to see the kind of people that were affected, probably women and children who have no business in the conflict, probably a breadwinner whose death would change the complete circumstances of his family, whether it's a wife or children who have to go to school. In a harsh economy like ours, it is becoming painful, and it is coming from a place that is not exactly known for this kind of violence. It's just Nasarawa here, 40 kilometers from the capital city. It should worry everybody. Not because it is Nasarawa, but it tells you how close that this is to home, And so we looked at all of that, and it's a crisis that has not ended in its own right. 5,000 persons has been displaced. And if something is not done to nip the bud, Nasarawa may just be going the way of Kaduna, of Niger, of Sokoto, of, and that is not something we want in our hands. We put those together and we felt that on a scale, we should give publicity to this one.
Okay, now let's take a look at, one of the writers here that states residents actually flee as bandits kill traditional ruler in Kaduna. Now, remember recently the governor, lifted the network, in Kaduna and everything. And the reason why, network coverage was reduced to minimal was because he wanted to, sort out the whole insecurity thing. I don't know, I'm yet to hear, results. I'm yet to hear results on, how the whole operation went and, why the whole network, was lifted, while the ban was lifted.
Prior to my coming into the studio, I stumbled somewhere as I was preparing myself on an information that about 8,100 and so number of bandits were rounded up in Kaduna. I'm not sure whether it is within the period of this whole network shutting down. See, every action we take has a positive and a negative side. It makes sense to want to say, because these guys are coordinating fantastic attacks with the aid of a communication gadget, let us put it off and try to see if we can disrupt that coordination and then take advantage of it. What we have not seen, however, is you cannot perpetually put off the network. On the one hand, you want to get to the body, yes, but you are stopping the livelihood of others. So Sunday and Husseina in Kaduna, we have a medical emergency. We can't call the ambulance because the network is down and we are probably in an area where it is badly affected. Or what if some group have been able to coordinate themselves and are carrying out attack? How can we alert the security agencies? Those are issues on the one hand. What the public opinion suggests is you shut this thing down when you want to carry out a massive attack, whether it's area bombing and grand mopping, as a stopgap measure. And the moment you are done with that, you should restore these things because lives has to go on. I mean, have you imagined whenever the network, there's a general network failure on your service provider for even just 1 hour. Can you imagine the kind of discomfort it brings? You know you are cut off from the world and you could be missing out on just about anything. A whole lot, depends on them. Remember, some of these schools in these states are even not on session. For the private developers, they probably are keeping the student up to pace with some kind of online study. Now, all of those were brought to a hold, So it made sense that they shut it down, but whether it made sense to have shut it down for the number of months that they did was another different thing, because these service providers are in need for money. They have deployed resources and facilities. They are paying their personnel on ground regardless of whether that thing was bringing in money or not. And you are not going to waive their profits on account of this national service or shutting down these things because they needed to support the fight against insurgency. So we don't know what the results are exactly. Why it may have supported the fight, maybe on a review we'll be able to tell on a scale whether there was more benefits or losses as a result of this kind of actions.
All right. Now let's take a look at, another burning issue at hand presently is the issue of the Omicron variant. Nigeria entered first, second, third, and now we're in the fourth wave. And the NCD is also advising, Nigerians against unnecessary travels. But despite all of this, it seems like it has become a norm for us here in Nigeria. A lot of people have not been vaccinated and we are all just going about our daily businesses. What should Nigeria really prepare for?
The scenario with the Omicron virus has become similar to what we have seen with the bandits case in Nigeria. We get very familiar quickly in this part of the world. And that is because, you see, on a daily basis, the average Nigerian is fighting between his life and his livelihood. Okay, don't go out so that you don't contract Omicron virus. How much food do you have to sustain you at home anyways? You know, so that is the balance, the fine balance that the average Nigerian had to contend with. In the newsroom yesterday, I called a number of my colleagues who are down and ill. And so I was discussing with another colleague, and I said, he was saying, A, B, C, X, Y, Z in his own decks are down. And I said, yes, I just spoke to 1, 2, 3 persons who are also there. He said, no, this thing is Omicron virus. I said, whatever you call it, you and I are here. And the paper has to come out tomorrow. You know, not just because the paper has to come out, we also need the pay at the end of the month to meet other obligations. That is, I mean, imagine telling a mechanic, don't go to your shop so that you don't come in contact with people you don't have Omicron virus. You say, no, people have been dying. Something has to kill a man. Let us go and get, you know, so it's as bad as it has gotten. It has also not been helped by the amount of doubts that have been perpetuated either in the social media, but even very respectable individuals in the society who had come up with all kinds of theory, some very ridiculous, and even people who had even finished giving birth keep telling you that they say, no, this thing stops you from giving further birth. And I will say to them, how much more children do you want? You know, so all kinds of story has created doubts in the minds of people, very educated people, and rightly so, because quite a number of information around this vaccine, its safety, its side effects, are not in the public domain, you know, sufficiently as they should be. So, and even if they were, people also still reserve the right to express cynicism or skepticism around some. It has always been. We saw that with the polio virus in Nigeria some 20 years ago. So these are some of the things. The government need to do more than just issuing threats, more than just saying you can't come into the office, because people are finding ways to procure the cards.
True.
Anyway. You know, you have to emphasize the health benefits, the importance, and the safety so that saner minds could take. And you have to propagate this story from a self to self. We saw that with the HIV virus. It was difficult at first, but when people started coming out to say, I have done it, I am taking the retroviral drugs and I'm fine, other people started saying, oh, if ABC and XYZ could admit it and are in the process and nothing had happened to them, I can as well take a cue. Those kind of communication approach, developmental communication approach, is something I think we should be looking at exploring.
I think one of the reasons why a lot of Nigerians are skeptical about taking the vaccine is the fact that, you know, the reports that even after you take the vaccine, you know, it doesn't mean that, you know, you won't be infected. You know, it just slows it down, but you will definitely be infected. And we have on Punch here, the NCDC saying Nigeria recorded 500% infection increase in 2 weeks.
Yeah. One, remember, however true that is, I don't know, but when these things were, this whole spread was serious in Europe, was at the winter. And the explanation then was that the weather was an enabling factor. We are in the harmattan in Nigeria, something that mirrors the winter. Who knows if that is a factor for this widespread? That is on the one side. You talked about people having it, getting infected. And I will give you a simple scenario. I think it's an information that even the NCDC had talked about, that the vaccines do not shield you from not picking it. But what then happens is that you would not get severely sick, and your likelihood of dying from the infections are minimal, because your system, your body has been trained to recognize this thing as a virus and attack it immediately. And the scenario I will use in explaining this is simple. My own daughter, 3 days ago, I woke up to notice a rash around her body. I ignored it for the better part of the day, but on the second thought, I said to myself, it's the harmattan. You can't even put on the fans and the AC, so why is the rash when there is no heat? And I approached a primary healthcare center, and they said it's measles. But I remember she is vaccinated against measles. But it didn't stop it from coming. Rather, that that irritating intensity
Yeah.
that you see with all that pulse and
Stopped
everything.
it from spreading.
Yes, didn't come out that way. It just came out mildly like a heat rash, and with a little application of what's the drug now? Calamine lotion.
Yeah.
It disappeared. You know, and with that scenario, I recall that it happened with my second son. It was a similar scenario. And the question I asked in the hospital was, but this boy is fully vaccinated. They said, yes, that is why it is not worse than this. And they took me to the ward and showed me what a proper measles were. This is the same situation. Apparently, because of that vaccination, it somehow manages to show its face, but she was going about her normal activity. She didn't even bother whether there was something on her skin. The whole high fever that comes with it and all that irritation and the scratch were not there. And she was vaccinated, you know. So I want to think that even though we are not medical personnel, this explains some of the things. And that is why, whereas we have seen a quadruple in the number of infection, we are not recording as many deaths as we did in the early days when a vast number of our citizens were not vaccinated and or even knew anything to do about this thing. So somehow it kind of explained some of the scenarios that we have seen. I hope that on a daily basis, like we see with the WHO and the rest, our own NDC, somehow they happen to have gone down. I'm not sure whether it's the briefing that had gone down or the Nigerians stopped paying attention to them, but I think they have to find a way to increase awareness in the minds of people.
Okay, now, when the COVID-19 pandemic came, it shut down economies, everything was shut down. And then we came into first, second, third, and now we're in the fourth wave. And already some countries, some European countries are suggesting to go on another lockdown. In your opinion, do we really need to go into another lockdown, or should we just live, you know, with the pandemic and go about our lives?
The truth of the matter is, another lockdown for Nigeria will be a disaster. We have seen Holland saying they are shutting down to sometimes around January 9th, except for essential services. We have seen some part of Germany, I think we have seen Belgium, and all of that. I was in France or so. So, these are economies with systems and designs that work. When they announce lockdown on the one hand, it automatically activates palliative.
On the other hand.
On the other hand. Usaina was saying, quite a number of persons were not traveling this year, and we were saying there is a rent waiting in January, there's a school fees waiting in January, and all other sundry expenses that have to come in January. And you know the funny things, they will come in before the salaries.
It's true.
So if you are not careful how you travel, you will be stranded in January. So imagine telling those kind of persons who are practically saving anything they can muster to meet these expenditures, asking them to go back to another lockdown. That would not work. This government doesn't even have the extra cash to support any kind of palliative, call it any name. You know, and we saw the amount of damage that the first lockdown did on households in this country, you know, because factories were shut down. And what the factories would do immediately, they go into that kind of redundancy, is to lay off. And they further compounded this in schools were shut and teachers laid off. You know, it was only the government staff that had managed to keep getting their salaries while the pandemic lasted. So it's not something we can afford right now on the one hand. What the government can do, which is practical, is to increase vaccination, which is what they are doing with saying you're a civil servant, you can come into the office except you are vaccinated. We are seeing private firms like GT Bank saying from ABC and XYZ date until you can show us a proof of vaccination, you aren't stepping into any of our offices as a staff. Some other banks have been subtle about it by even working out a program that brings vaccination to their staff right there in the office. So if your MD is standing on the vaccination line, what are you afraid of? He likes his life more than you. He has more money in the bank account more than you. So he wants to be alive for longer so that he can enjoy his private jet and Bahamas. You know, so the question really is, if he's on the queue, what are you waiting for? You know, and those kind of communication, those symbolic communications are important. for people to say, I'm not as rich as this guy. If he needs this, if he thinks it's important, the concept of opinion leaders theory in communication, they think if this person who I think is sensitive, is enlightened, is exposed, deems this important, then I think it's something that is worth giving a try.
All right, let's go back to insurgency. Now, on the front page of the Punch newspaper, just at the bottom, there's a story here from that the Kwara commissioner says officials siphon government funds under cover of paying ransoms.
This whole ransom thing is a cartel. And I had a close experience. I am the in-law to Dr. Philip Ataga, whose wife was murdered last year, January. So I'm married to his sister, and I was neck deep in that whole negotiation when the kids and the wife were taken. One of the biggest experiences I took out of that was how our system functions when somebody is in crisis. And to think that even the ransoms were delivered by people suggested by the police, opened my eye to a whole new dimension. And so at a time, I was privy to another case of some of those immigration officers that were picked up at the Lokoja axis. And this raising of ransom cuts across everybody. When it happens, they reach everyone. And sometimes if you are from an organization that is perceived to have some cash, it even makes it more lucrative. And the organization cannot stay away from not making something available, not to be perceived as an organization that doesn't care. And so people who work in certain kind of organization, by the virtue of that practice, become even more exposed to danger. I mean, let me not give some, I don't know who else is watching, let me not run some ideas about places where this kind of people come from. And so the bandits are beginning to understand that, no, this is a juicy organization. If we pick Sunday from here, then maybe his employers will come and part of the negotiation, the ransom money will come from them. So, and then they can justify it in their books that, we had to settle this kind of people to free the MD or to free ABC and XYZ stuff. So it's a complex business. They found it so lucrative, and they are perpetuating it because those agencies had continued to meet their demands. You now understand why with certain government they will tell you no negotiations. Well, if they have succeeded in taking, painful as it is, you can hold him. If you want to free, but we are not going to continue to oil what you do by giving any kind of ransom. The Catholic Church, from the last time I checked, took that kind of stance because they have branches everywhere, priests everywhere, and religious working everywhere. They kept picking up their priests, hoping to pay ransom. When the church stood his ground and said, you are a beloved priest, you are working for God, we know, but we are not parting with anything, because how much more are we going to pay with over 5,000 branches nationwide? How can we even sustain that? The bandits understood that these guys don't pay anything. They left them. I know there used to be a joke around the Nigerian comedians that would say, no, kidnappers don't pick Chinese and Indian people. They don't pay ransom. Don't you think that is strategic? It was because of the way they communicated that if you take anybody, when you are done feeding the person and you are tired, you're free because you are not coughing out anything, So that is what this report is speaking to, people being targeted because of where they work and because of the likelihood that they think these places would make some ransom available.
Okay, I think with that, we'll wrap up the dailies today. Thank you so much, Sunday Michael. Yes, he's the Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust. Thank you so much for joining us today.